Matt Perrin, Director of Caregiver Engagement, back with you with my friend Sheila Schultz. Hey, Sheila.
Hey, Matt, how are you today?
Good, good. Thanks for coming back. Appreciate it. You're making a habit of this,
I know.
which I love. But excited to talk about palliative care today for lots of different reasons. So that's the topic. Per usual, a little bit of housekeeping. Number one, if you're joining one of these sessions for the first time, welcome. Glad you're here. We are Carallel. We're a caregiver support company. We support, guide, and assist family caregivers with anything that's on their plate. So we do that in two ways. One, with our team of caregiving experts, who we call Care Advocates, of which Sheila is one, and then we complement that one-on-one support over the phone, email, and chat with our digital experience, which is My Care Desk by Carallel. I think of it as sort of just my one-stop digital shop for all things caregiving, helpful articles, videos, etc., practical tools, lots of great stuff in there. So, and we make our service available through health plans and employers across the country. So if you have access, great. If you don't, ask your health plan or employer if you do. So that's Carallel. Second piece of housekeeping, there was a comment last month in last month's session, or a question or a recommendation, I guess, more than anything else, that we make these sessions 60 minutes. So certainly considering that and how it impacts the rest of our programming schedule, but just wanted to let the people that were requesting that know that we're considering it. And last but not least, on housekeeping, conversations, we use that word intentionally. There's no slides here, no presentation. It's just Sheila and I having a conversation, and hopefully you all sharing perspectives, questions, anything at all in the chat at the bottom of your console. So did I miss anything, Sheila? Is that all our housekeeping?
I think you've got it once again.
All right, good. I'm batting 1,000 at one thing in my life. So I got that going for me. Okay, palliative care. So per usual, we're trying to ground these conversations in the practical is how I think about it, right? So, we want to today, as it relates to palliative care, be really keeping it kind of simple. This was a really, it was a little bit of a scary word actually for me when I was caregiving. It was, I didn't understand it. I think there's consensus out in the world that palliative care is along with hospice actually, which is different, which we're going to touch on, but a little bit misunderstood and certainly underutilized. And for my family, it was a gift. But so we're going to talk about what it is and who provides it. We're going to talk about when someone's eligible or when someone can get palliative care and how it's paid for. And then we're going to touch on how it is different than hospice and other medical care you might be receiving. So that's the goal for today. How's that sound to you, Sheila? Good?
Perfect.
All right, let's do it. So, as I just mentioned, in my own personal experience, caregiving, which was a dementia situation, I get asked this by friends all the time. They know that I work at Carallel and support caregivers. They know that I was a caregiver. So like, I'm like the caregiving guy to all my friends and acquaintances. So people always ask me about, a bunch of different stuff, but palliative care is like this little bit of a mythical thing to some people, right? And I answer usually in a couple of two ways. Like, number one, it just was such a gift to our family, and I use family intentionally because it wasn't just for Steve, my father-in-law, who was that was the first time I had experience with palliative care. It was for all of us. It helped all of us. Which just and gift is like one of the best words I can think about it. And the other is like sort of like a warm blanket. Like it was like this just like or safety net. It just it came into our lives at just the right time in our personal caregiving journey. So all of that to start out with this question, because Sheila, you're really the expert here. Given the work you do every day and your background, but can we set the record straight? What is palliative care? How would you define it to the audience?
Well, very broadly, palliative care is a very specialized medical care that's designed for people with serious illnesses or chronic illnesses or both. So it's different than regular care. It's different, like you said, than hospice care. And it's geared to a very specific population. You're very ill or you've got a chronic illness.
Got it. Okay. And so like, I guess without giving away the whole program, right? But what is different about it? You know, what makes it different? And it's okay if we commingle a little bit with hospice here, but because we're going to set that record straight a little bit later in the conversation. But what makes palliative care different?
Well, the way that I like to think about it is that its goal is quality of life. And the team will do that by managing symptoms. So you think of someone with a chronic or a very serious illness like cancer or COPD or congestive heart failure. There's a lot of them. All of the symptoms that go along with that. The goal of this program is not to cure those treatments, but to improve the quality of life and reduce the symptoms of that disease. So that's the real goal is, and as you mentioned, Matt, it's not just for the person who has it, it's also to improve the quality of life of the family. Right. So it's a wonderful program.
Yeah. So quality of life, I want to talk about that, and I'm glad you used that phrase. So in my experience, in my family's experience, I should say, but in my head, right? Like I struggled with that, right? We were caring for my mom who was living with Alzheimer's disease, and my father-in-law who was living with Lewy body dementia. And as I mentioned, first experience with palliative care was with my father-in-law, and he was living in our home, and I kind of poo-pooed the quality of life possibility, right? Because in my head, in my cynical moments, I was thinking, well, quality of life, like it's not going to be like it was before, right? He's 6 years into a dementia, living with Lewy body dementia in his case. It's not going to be like it was. So, and that was just, I don't blame myself or fault myself for having that reaction or thinking, like as we say a lot on these conversations, whatever we're feeling as caregivers is valid, right? But like there's so much that happens between the way it was before and how it is now, right? And there's so much there's so much incremental, I guess, opportunity there. And part of the reason I say I refer to, in my own experience, palliative care as a gift, and it's just my experience, is because that was one of the palliative care in general was one of the things that showed me that, right? Like it showed me that, sure, it's probably not in our case going to be like it was before, but there are gains to be made. There are things like there are ways that it could be better for all, and that happened for us. So I'm glad you used that phrase.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that it's just about in the situation where you are now, what's the best that we can do? So there might be some symptoms, and can we reduce those symptoms? So within that disease state, just make it the best that we possibly can within that illness or disease.
Yeah. And one of the other things that really struck me about our experience, not that our other healthcare providers didn't per se, some are better than others, but something about the way our palliative team, the way they listened. I don't know, it was just it was just like a real clear, real life example of how it feels to be actively listened to.
Yeah, and that's part of it, Matt. It's the emotional support as well as the physical support. So that's what they're experts at. It's the whole person. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered sort of rough baseline on what it is and what's different about it. So I guess one question that comes to mind, does it replace sort of the care? Does palliative care replace the medical care that you had in place to begin with?
No, not at all. It complements it. So if you
Uh,
think of your healthcare team as working on either a cure or treatments, and they're working hard to extend your life or get rid of the disease, the palliative care team comes in and says, okay, you guys do that. We're going to work on whatever side effects or symptoms that are coming up as a result of treatments or as a result of the disease itself. We're going to soften that. We're going to make, if you're having trouble breathing, we're going to help you with that. If you're having pain, we'll help you with that. Or just anxiety. That's one of the symptoms they could really work on. So
right.
they work in conjunction with your regular health team.
Okay. And we're going to come back to that a little later in the conversation as we draw some contrast with hospice. But and you use the word team. What, and I think I did too. It's been a long week, but what is, and maybe it's different in different situations, but what, generally speaking, like what could someone expect in a palliative care team? Like who are the players? Um, Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. And it is different in every area, and within every group. But typically there are physicians, there are nurse practitioners, there are nurses, social workers, there could be psychologists, there could be chaplains. So as you could see, they're really addressing all of the aspects of your well-being from their different levels of expertise. And they're going to come in once or twice a week, maybe, and check those symptoms, check those, how are you doing emotionally? How are you doing socially? Is there anything we could do to support your pain or trouble breathing? So it's a really wonderful, comprehensive team that you're working with.
Okay. And I guess and I know there's not really a good answer to this, but I'm just curious, and I'm thinking out loud, but why is it, because it's all making sense to me now. And if, funny how that works when you've had a personal experience with the thing you're talking about. But why is it so misunderstood? Like, why don't more people kind of just know what it is and how it can help, and therefore take advantage?
Well, I think it's relatively new compared to other healthcare teams. That's one thing. So it's not new, but it's relatively new. It's not the same as your primary care physician. A lot of people lump it into palliative/hospice. So people think it's the same thing. There is a difference because palliative is the umbrella. And hospice is one way to provide palliative care, but it's very separate and very distinct. So I think there's a lot of confusion because people, one, have never heard of it, or two, they think it's the same as hospice, including some medical professionals. So it's sometimes difficult.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you drew that distinction and appreciate that. Where do you get it? Like, where is it provided? Do you have to be in a hospital or?
No, it's provided wherever you are. You could be in a hospital, you could be at home, you could be in a skilled nursing facility, assisted, anywhere where you are, it can be provided for you. So that's the thing that's so great about it. It's not like you have to go to a center or a certain place. Not a place, it's a type of care.
Okay. And then is it like how do you pay for it? Is it covered by insurance? Like what is that side of the equation, which is obviously a very important side?
Yeah, you bet.
Like, how is it paid for? Is it covered by insurance? All that sort of stuff.
Medicare covers it, Medicaid covers it. Most insurances also cover it. And, you just have to talk to your plan, but I have run into very few situations where it's not covered for insurances, certainly not for Medicare or Medicaid.
Right, okay. And then we buried the lead a little bit, but how does someone qualify? Like when, I know there are clear guidelines with hospice, but like when can someone get palliative care?
Well, since it's for people with chronic illnesses or a diagnosis of a serious illness, it could happen right then, as soon as you're diagnosed, or anywhere along that spectrum. As long as you're ill, seriously ill, and you have a chronic disease, you can get palliative care. So it's not like a tipping point or anything. If you have the disease or the condition, you're eligible.
Okay. And does it have to be a disease, or is it like an onset of symptoms, or I guess it
Yeah,
just feels gray to me, this part. And I guess the recourse for a caregiver is A, being aware of it, B, if there is a serious situation, talk with your doctor about it. But
you bet. And that's always the best, and typically that's the person you're going to be speaking to when you find out about the diagnosis, or you're going to get treated for the diagnosis. When you start having those symptoms, feeling uncomfortable, or your family is noticing that you could really use some more assistance, talk to your doctor and say, is it appropriate? Is this a good time for it? And how can it help us? And that's once again about noticing what's changing or what's different in their condition, and saying, hey, doctor, this is really causing a lot of problems. What can we do? Is palliative care an option?
So, and that's, I'm glad you mentioned that, but like what kind of, that's hard. And again, I'm a human, so a lot of this is framed through my own personal experience, but in a dementia situation, it sometimes can be hard, because every day, there were good days, bad days. And I'm sure that's the case with any circumstance, just in a different form. But how do you know when a condition's changing? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you, like,
Yeah,
I guess it might be best just to default to, if it's in your mind, ask.
you bet.
But
That's
it
what I was
just,
going to say.
yeah, but it was just, in our experience with dementia, it was really difficult, because you don't know, we just got into this cycle for a period of time of saying, well, we'll wait and see how it is tomorrow, and wait and see how it is tomorrow. And it wasn't until we started actually making notes and kind of keeping when I say a log, it's way too fancy. This was like a crumpled up napkin, but we were basically writing it, just the date and anything that we observed. But that part was, it's easy to talk about, but when you're in the caregiving weeds day to day, it can be a little bit hard to.
Well, you bring up a really good point, Matt, and I'm so glad you did, take notes on that, because sometimes the symptoms are subtle, the signs are subtle, and some of them are going to be obvious, like if they're in pain or they're having trouble breathing. But sometimes it's just a behavior thing, and that's another thing that can be assisted and helped with palliative care, because they're always looking at, what's the underlying thing that we can manage in that behavior or in that symptom. So it can be tough, but when you're wondering what to do, ask.
Yeah.
You could ask every month and say, what about now? What about now? What about now?
Yeah. And it's just I'm just thinking back as you're talking, and there are a number of scenarios when you're just, you feel like you sound like a broken record in your own mind. But I guess the lesson there is, like, be the broken record. If it's on your mind and weighing on you, be the broken record. I guess you just sparked another thought or question that I had for you. So when you're talking about, like, do you, as a patient and family, do you have the opportunity to shape the care, like what's delivered in terms of care? Like, what is the dynamic between patient, family, palliative care team? What does that dynamic look like?
Well, you probably noticed in your own situation, it's very personalized.
Yes.
So they're going to come into the situation and see the players and see who's stressed out and who's having some other issues. And so every situation is different, and that team will personalize it from one family to another. So that's a beautiful thing. And I'm sure you experienced that, that it felt like, wow, they touched exactly on what I needed.
Yeah, no, it's I did lead the witness there a little bit, because that part was like I said, it just felt like at the beginning of the conversation, it felt like what we needed at just the right time, I guess, in our experience. So okay, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock.
Mm.
We're coming up on the bottom of the hour, but couple of things that I wanted to well, really one main thing, but just a plug for any questions. We're just time flies when you're having fun over here for Sheila and I, but any questions at all, or perspectives to share, anything, drop them in the QA or the chat icon down at the bottom of your console. But going back to your point, Sheila, about sort of the confusion between palliative care and hospice.
Mhm.
And I had on my notes and just regular medical care, but we've kind of touched on that. We know now that palliative care is really focused on comfort, quality of life, alleviating pain, honoring wishes, it feels like to me, and doing that in concert with someone's existing medical team,
Right.
which is amazing. What about hospice? Another amazing resource, by the way.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think the best way to think of it is that they're both focused on quality of life. They're both focused on you and your family. Quality of life, managing symptoms, making you comfortable in lots of different ways. The big difference is that palliative care, you can get that while other teams are working aggressively to treat your condition in the hopes to make you better, in the hopes to extend your life, to make things to cure you.
right.
And the hospice is really just the comfort, because it's toward end of life. They're not going to work any longer on trying to cure things. So as you can see, they're very similar, but the big difference is that in palliative, you can have all kinds of aggressive treatment and that beautiful comfort care at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, and good timing, and thank you, audience members. We have a few questions that have just come in. One was on what you were just talking about. Can you have palliative care and curative care that's meant to cure the illness? And the answer is yes. And in palliative care, that's the case. That's not the case in hospice. So that's a key
Right.
difference, as you were saying. And we have a couple of other questions, because there's one other thing I want to touch on in terms of the difference between hospice and palliative care. But another question: can palliative care guide you for when hospice should be called? And
What was did you have that situation?
yeah, and they made the handoff essentially, right?
Yeah.
I will say, just personal experience, and again, this may vary, but there was an adjustment period for our family, because our experience with palliative care with my father-in-law was so just great for us. It was hard for us to let them go, because palliative care and hospice don't work together, right?
Right.
So that was an adjustment for us. But yes, they were our guides, and when along with my father-in-law's primary care and neurologist as well, I should say. But the palliative care was involved in that handoff to hospice. Yes. And then another question about a really important topic, but do they provide incontinence products?
This is something that comes up a lot. There are all kinds of support that they can provide for you. I'm not sure if you had needs for things like that, Matt, or if you've had experience with yours and the success that you've had.
Yeah. So hospice, I know, definitely did in
Yep.
our case. I'd have to check on the on palliative, and I'm not sure. That may vary by provider, but I will follow up on that question specifically. Question asker. Try and keep people anonymous
I
here.
haven't run into that question very much with palliative.
Yeah, but yeah, so but it's a really important question because I mean, Sheila, I know you and I are in agreement on this because we work so closely together on so many different things. But incontinence is a topic that should not be taught, is not talked about nearly enough. Because I mean, it was one of the hardest parts of my personal caregiving experience, and we hear often from people about the challenge, the variety of challenges that incontinence brings. So I'm glad you asked, and I will follow up. And we're at 28, so there's one more question. So it's a longer question. I will follow up with you, but the gist of this question is the person that asked its partner had prostate cancer back in 2013, and has some lingering effects from the treatment. And do those qualify the partner?
Well, if you're
for
seriously
palliative?
ill, right? If you're seriously ill, and that's one question to take to your doctor. So it doesn't have to be that you are that you have a specific diagnosis right today, that, you know, even if it was in the past and you're having some complications now, but talk to your doctor about that. And like I said, just keep asking, because it's not going to hurt, and it's going to really make a big difference. Yeah,
recommend. I co-sign on that one for sure. But it seems like it could, based on the history there. And I say that not knowing the full picture, obviously. One thing we didn't touch on, another difference in terms of the qualification criteria between palliative care and hospice, right? So we talked about, you let us know, Sheila, that palliative care, it's someone's eligible for palliative care, generally speaking, at the onset of symptoms, or diagnosis of serious illness or chronic illness, right? Did I replay that back right? Now, what about hospice? Because I know it's different, right?
Yep. Well, in hospice, you're not expected to survive. You know, you are at the end of your life, and you know, typically they say, if you asked your doctor and said, would you expect him or her to still be here 6 months from now? If the doctor says, no, I really don't, then it's a hospice situation, and that decision certainly is yours to make.
But also, in our case, the doctor guided, right? You know, it was time, and we did a session just like this, but on hospice last year. And I told the story. My mother was on hospice for 4 days. My father-in-law was on hospice for close to 2 years. Every 6 months he kept getting recertified. So, but the qualification is very different. So I wanted to call that out, in addition to the other main difference between palliative care and hospice, which is that on palliative care, you can be getting all of the care related to just quality of life, comfort, managing pain, etc., in addition to your curative treatments, in addition to efforts to cure whatever the root cause is. So look at that. We're 1 minute over. Apologies to everyone. I am going to put in the chat real quick here, next month's session, where we're going to be talking about 7 achievable ideas for self-care. So in my part of me thinks of the former caregiver in me thinks of self-care almost as a 4-letter word sometimes, because people are always telling me, you have to take care of yourself, self-care. And I'm like, okay, when do I have time? Well, we're talking about 7 achievable ways, or 7 achievable tips for getting some time for yourself. And so we'll do that on, I believe it's May 21st. I may have that date wrong, but sometime toward the end of May. And here is the registration link for anybody that'd like to join. Any parting shots, Sheila?
Just don't forget about palliative. You know, it's an option. Ask for it. Now that you know a little bit more about it, you could read up on it and talk to your doctor.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me again.
For having me.
Appreciate it. And everyone that attended, thank you so much for being here, and hope the rest of the day is a good one, and we'll see you soon.